Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presta Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadesha Tarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyas cha kripa sindhubhya eva cha paditanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anantagori Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai. So, well, this is the first evening I'm here alone. In the temple room, alone except for Radharanath. Oh, there's Sachikamat dropping in, and Giri Govardhan, Lord Chaitanya Prabhupada, and so on and so on. Anyway, that's all right. So, just a couple of words of introduction. You know, this is not a long chapter, 35 verses, sort of medium length maybe, but we've been taking extra time. This is the fifth day, the fifth evening that we're discussing it, and the reason for that is that it is more complex and it is more difficult to follow than, for example, the next chapter. Next chapter 14, we're going to start on Monday, and that's the three modes of material nature. It's very important, it's very interesting indeed, but it's much more straightforward. It's much easier to follow. It's just, you know, really it's very easy, and of course it's very relevant because we're all influenced by the modes of nature, and we need to learn what modes are influencing us more than others and how they're influencing, and like that. This is an important part of Krishna consciousness. So it's simpler, and there are less verses. I think there's 26 or 27. Let me just have a look. See, in the 14th, 27 verses in the 14th chapter. So it's slightly shorter, but because of it being simpler, my prediction is we'll probably finish in 3 evenings, might even be 2.5. We haven't really done that, broken a chapter, finished in the middle of a session and gone on to the next chapter. I don't think we've done that, as I remember. Anyway, we'll see. As always, we'll take it as it comes, but we've really tried our best here to clarify as much as possible what is there in the 13th chapter, because it's deep, it's very deep. It can be confusing, but it is important. All right, so now first thing we'll do is we will make you aware that there is a special question for those of you doing Bhakti Shastri. There's a special question based on the last verse we did, verse 26, which was actually in the previous section. Anyway, that's okay. We ran out of time, basically, last night. So let's just inform you. So this is special question based on verse 26. Let me just read verse 26 again. Again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. Because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of birth and death. So there's a question related to that. I mean, related in the sense of a similar theme. And in this regard, we're referring you to Srimad Bhagavatam, 6th Canto, Chapter 9, Verse 1, Purport. 691, Purport. And there Srila Prabhupada says, one must hear from authorities. Therefore Shukadeva Goswami, a great personality, says, what I'm describing to you, O King, is what I've heard from authoritative sources. This is the Vedic system. The Vedic knowledge is called Shruti because it must be received by being heard from authorities. So the question then is, we want you to cite, refer to a purport that was mentioned in the class, this one, about hearing from authorities, which says that the Vedic knowledge is called what? Because it must be received by being heard from who? So have a look in that purport and you'll get the answer. It's pretty straightforward. But I'll just let you into the secret right now. Vedic knowledge is called Shruti because it must be received by being heard from authorities. So these are the two parts of the answer. Okay. So now we move on to the last section from verse 27 to verse 35, and we call this Jnana Chakshush, the vision of knowledge. Jnana, of course, means knowledge. Chakshush literally really means vision or eyes, like eyesight. Yeah. Chakshur unmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Famous, extremely famous verse. Yes, how the spiritual master opens our eyes. All right, so it is from verse 27 to 35, which is the last verse of the chapter. But actually, before we begin, I want to just read the 6 subject matters which we have been looking at and are still looking at in this 13th chapter. So first is Prakriti, or material nature. 2 is Purusha, the enjoyer. And enjoyer means the soul and the supersoul, or the Supreme Lord. Then Kshetra, the field of activities, which means the body, the gross and subtle bodies, plus the sort of the living symptoms which are there within the material system of the material body, the field of activities. Then Kshetragya means the knower of the field, and again there's 2, the soul and the supersoul. They're both within the body, or which is the field of activity. Then number 5 was Jnanam, knowledge and the process by which knowledge is acquired. And then 6, Gyayam, the object of knowledge. What is that thing or entity or whatever which we're meant to be developing knowledge of? All right, so let's go then to the section we're on tonight. Here we are. It's the 6th section, Jnana Chakshus, the vision of knowledge, verse 27 to 35. And we have I think 3, we must have 3 subsections here, different specific focuses, different specific subject matters, which crop up in the course of the whole section. So the first subsection then is just verse 27 on its own. And the idea which is presented here is that everything we see is a combination of the field and the knower, or you could say of the field and the knowers. So whatever you see, moving, non-moving, even living, not living, it's simply combination of the field of activities and the knower. So Srila Prabhupada begins the purport. Both material nature and the living entity, which were existing before the creation of the cosmos, are explained in this verse. Now that's a pretty strong and clear statement, isn't it? So both material nature and the living entity, both of which are eternal, ever existing, they're explained in this verse. So basically, everything is a combination, Prabhupada goes on to say. Whatever is created is but a combination of the living entity and the material nature. And Srila Prabhupada then gives examples. There are many manifestations like trees, mountains, and hills, which are not moving. And there are many existences which are moving, like us. And all of them are simply combinations of material nature and the superior nature, the jiva, the living entity. So, and Prabhupada goes on that Prabhupada makes the point that nothing can develop without the touch of the superior nature, the living entity. But then Prabhupada goes on to say that all of these combinations, what is mentioned here in the verse, all things, moving, non-moving, they're combinations of the field of activities and the knower. So Prabhupada explains that the process, the combination, is effected by the Lord. And the Lord, who is not entangled in that, the living entity as the knower of the field. The living entity as the knower of the field is entangled in the field. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is also the knower, but is never entangled in the field. Yes, so Prabhupada closes the purport saying the material nature is created by him, and the superior nature, that's us, is placed in this material nature. And thus all these activities, manifestations, and whatnot within the material sphere, they take place. Now, so that was a subsection on its own. Now here's a subsection. Some practical advice. How to separate the knower from the field. The knower, that's us. We're entangled, we just said. We're entangled in the field. But Krishna consciousness, intelligence, truth, reality means we have to become extracted from that. Otherwise, all is lost. It's hopeless. It's just hopeless. So some practical advice, how to separate the knower from the field, and this is from verse 28 to verse 34, meaning there's only one more verse left after this subsection, and that's the end of the chapter. Right, so let us, as usual, let us read through the verses just so we get the flow, what is being discussed and how it's being discussed like that. All right, so 28. One who sees the supersoul accompanying the individual soul in all bodies, and who understands that neither the soul nor the supersoul within the destructible body is ever destroyed, actually sees. Yes, well. Okay, anyway, let's just carry on. 29. One who sees the supersoul equally present everywhere, in every living being, does not degrade himself by his mind. Thus, he approaches the transcendental destination. Yeah, well, that's pretty clear and pretty important. Verse 30. One who can see that all activities are performed by the body, which is created of material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees. 31. When a sensible man ceases to see different identities due to different material bodies, and he sees how beings are expanded everywhere, he attains to the Brahman conception. Yes, so the first couple of verses there, what was it, 28, 29, that was about seeing the soul and the super soul. Now here we are focusing on the soul again. Actually, verse 30, the previous verse, and this verse 31 and 32. Those with the vision of eternity can see that the imperishable soul is transcendental, eternal, and beyond the modes of nature. Despite contact with the material body, O Arjuna, the soul neither does anything nor is entangled. 33. The sky, due to its subtle nature, does not mix with anything, although it is all-pervading. Similarly, the soul, situated in Brahman vision, does not mix with the body, though situated in that body. Again, it's the soul. And more of the soul. 34. O son of Bharat, as the sun alone illuminates all this universe, so does the living entity, one within the body, illuminate the entire body by consciousness. Okay. So that's that section, subsection rather. Let's go through it. So again, the idea is some practical advice, how to separate the knower from the field. And knower, because in the sequence of verses, it's how many? Six or seven? It's 7 verses. It's talking about the knower as both the super soul and the individual soul, not just one or the other. So let's have a look at verse 28. One who sees the super soul accompanying the individual soul in all bodies, and who understands that neither the soul nor the super soul within the destructible body is ever destroyed, so that person actually sees. Yes, so in the purport, it's not a big purport, short purport. So Prabhupada explains, anyone, and anyway, this is a very important point, which has just been mentioned in the previous, in 26. Anyone who by good association can see 3 things combined together: the body, the proprietor of the body or individual soul, and the friend of the individual soul, means the super soul, is actually in knowledge. But the thing is, so that's okay. So that's good. That's important to know that. If you want to be in knowledge, you've got to see how in this world, the reality that we're involved in, it has 3 components: the body, the soul, and the super soul. So that's fine. But now how are we going to really penetrate this? And as the verse says, see the super soul accompanying the individual soul. How are we going to see? Where will we get those eyes of knowledge? I mean, eyes of knowledge, but in the sense of actual perception, realization. So Prabhupada explains, unless one has the association of a real knower of spiritual subjects, one cannot see these 3 things. Therefore, those who do not have that association are ignorant. Prabhupada saying, they simply see the body. What else? Nothing else. And therefore, they have the typically material conception of life that when the body dies, that's the end. Good night, Haribol. Well, not Haribol, just goodbye. And it's all over. It's all over now. But, of course, and this is very, should we say typical, but it's just, it's very straight, essential Krishna conscious understanding. Yeah. So, of course, it's not like that. It's not like that. Yeah. After the destruction of the body, the soul and supersoul continue. The two knowers, in other words, they continue. Yeah. And towards the end of the purport, well, actually, it's only about just past halfway even. Prabhupada makes, it's just an interesting little point he raises, that about the use of the term, the use or the how translators translate the term Parameshwar, which appears in the verse, that some, Prabhupada makes the point, some say that Parameshwar, as used here, as the word is used in the verse here, Parameshwar is referring to the soul. Param, of course, means supreme, and Ishvara means the controller. They say that it means the soul and not the super soul, because the soul is the master of the body, so to speak, the master of the body. Therefore, it's possible to speak like that. However, of course, we must note that Srila Prabhupada has translated Parameshwar as the super soul, and that we accept Prabhupada's presentation. Right, so this brings us on to verse 29. One who sees the super soul equally present everywhere, in every living being, does not degrade himself by his mind. Thus, he approaches the transcendental destination. Yeah, so if we see or understand, really, if we see or understand the presence of the super soul, we'll be freed from this, it's very destructive material consciousness. It's very destructive. Oh. So let me just read the purport. It's very short. The living entity, by accepting his material existence, has become situated differently than in his spiritual existence. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. So the living entity, by accepting material existence, that I am this body, I'm part of the material world. So by accepting his material existence, has become situated differently than in his spiritual existence. But if one understands the Supreme, it's one thing to see, but it begins with understanding. Yeah, the eyes of knowledge. So if one understands that the Supreme is situated in his Paramatma manifestation everywhere, that is, if one can see the presence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in every living thing, he doesn't degrade himself by a destructive mentality. And he therefore gradually advances to the spiritual world. The mind is generally addicted to sense gratifying processes. But when the mind turns to the supersoul, one becomes advanced in spiritual understanding. You know, like we mentioned, first comes understanding, then comes seeing, particularly in terms of spiritual realization, particularly. First comes understanding, then can come seeing. Otherwise one may see, but one may not actually see. How's that? Does that sound like word jugglery? You see a person, you see the body, and you think, oh yes, I'm seeing the person. But you are not seeing the person, because the person is the soul within. Plus there's the super soul within. But you'll never get to see them, actually see them, unless in the beginning you understand that they're there, and then follow the process for realizing them. Krishna consciousness. So, devotees, we have another special question. We have another special question based on this verse 29. So the verse, let me just repeat the verse. One who sees the super soul equally present everywhere in every living being does not degrade himself by his mind. Thus he approaches the transcendental destination. And we're referring you to a verse, or it's actually two verses from Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th canto, chapter 46, verses 32 and 33. Apparently it's an excerpt from those two verses. 10, 46, 32 and 33, which say, anyone, even a person in an impure state, who absorbs his mind in him, Mukunda and Balaram, for just a moment at the time of death, burns up all traces of sinful reactions, and immediately attains the supreme transcendental destination in a pure spiritual form, as effulgent as the sun. So this is a verse spoken by Uddhava, Sri Uddhava, the great devotee from Dwaraka, who's Krishna's closest associate in Dwaraka. He has spoken that. And the question is, a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam was mentioned in class, whereby a devotee was speaking about approaching the transcendental destination. Who was the devotee who spoke that verse? Well, we just told you it was Sri Uddhava. So on we go to verse 30. One who can see that all activities are performed by the body, which is created of material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees. Well, devotees, this reminds us of, for example, it reminds us of a few verses. Even a verse I think we read last night or maybe the night before, but particularly this verse really reminds us very strongly of Bhagavad Gita chapter 3 verse 27, which we read last night I think also. So that verse says, the translation is, the spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature. three modes of material nature. They're the energy which makes the activity happen. But those modes, where are they situated? In the body. It's the body which carries out the activities. So, under the influence or by the power of the three modes of material nature, this and our verse 30 here from this chapter 13, it's really it's just restating the same thing, at least 90%, if not even 100%, that the spirit soul thinks himself the doer of activities, but actually they're carried out by the modes of nature, which means, as our verse 30 here says, that it means the self does nothing. Self does nothing. There you go. It's the material modes which are energizing the body based on your desire, and therefore things are happening. So Srila Prabhupada says here, the body is made. It's a short purport actually. Prabhupada begins by saying, this body is made by material nature under the direction of the Supersoul. And whatever activities are going on in respect to one's body are not one's doing. Whatever one is supposed to do, either for happiness or for distress, one is forced to do because of the bodily constitution. The self, however, is outside all these bodily activities. Right. So, so these things are going on. And Prabhupada concludes the purport that this transcendental vision, if one cultivates that vision, which of course is based on the understanding, then that will make you see yourself separate from the bodily activities. You will see yourself, you will understand yourself, and ultimately see yourself as being a distinct entity from the body which is performing the activities. So a person who has that vision is the actual seer. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur makes an interesting statement here. Listen to this. You'll have to listen carefully. It's a little subtle. So he says, it's Srila Baladev Vijayabhushan. Srila Baladev Vijayabhushan says, I, a jiva, since I have a nature of knowledge and bliss, do not actually perform actions such as fighting or sacrifice which produce suffering. However, ultimately, Prakriti is superintended by me, is sort of managed by me, you could say. So ultimately, Prakriti is managed by me who has lost discrimination and possess beginningless impressions for enjoyment. So I am different. I, the jiva, I'm different from the body. And I'm not performing the activities which produce the material results. However, I am kind of supervising material nature, because I'm in the body and everything is happening on the basis of my desires and my karma from before. So it's all, I'm there. It's all going on the basis of me, in a sense. But who am I? Who am I? I'm a person who's lost discrimination. And I have so many impressions from living in material life for so long, of trying to enjoy. So he continues, this Prakriti alone, with the nature of happiness, distress, and illusion produced by the Supreme Lord, according to my desires for fulfilling my enjoyment. So this Prakriti performs the actions through my body and senses, which are produced by Prakriti. Because of supplying the body and senses, Prakriti is the doer of actions. Prakriti is the doer of the actions because of being the instrument, which is basically the same thing. I mean, it is the same thing. The three modes are doing things, making the body and senses do things. 31. When a sensible man ceases to see different identities due to different material bodies, and he sees how beings are expanded everywhere, he attains to the Brahman conception. So we have come back, right? There was mention of the Supersoul in 28 and 29, but now we've come back from 30. We've come back to a focus on the soul. 30, and we just read 31. So again, it's kind of like, regular, transcendental understanding based on Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada gives us in the purport that one should see that our bodies, the bodies we have, they arise from our different desires. And they are not us, and neither do they really, these bodies do not belong to us. They're on loan. They're on loan. So if you see in those terms, beginning with understanding in those terms, then you're actually seeing. And Prabhupada explains, in material life, obviously, as we know only too well, and we're prone to do it ourselves, everyone is seeing in terms of the body. The demigod, the human, the animal, whatever like that. Yes. So it's a question of vision. That vision has to be cultivated. The vision has to be cultivated. Prabhupada says here, this is material vision, not actual vision. So, we have to cultivate that transcendental vision. And Prabhupada concludes the purport. The spirit soul, due to contact with material nature, gets different types of bodies. When one can see this, he attains spiritual vision. See this, beginning with understanding, accepting that understanding. So thus being freed from differentiations like man, animal, big, low, etc., one becomes purified in his consciousness and able to develop Krishna consciousness in his spiritual identity. How he then sees things, will be explained in the next verse. which is right here, number 32. Let's just read it. Those with the vision of eternity can see that the imperishable soul is transcendental, eternal, and beyond the modes of nature. Despite contact with the material body, O Arjuna, the soul neither does anything nor is entangled. Sure, that's amazing, isn't it? Let's just read the purport. Again, it's a very short purport. A living entity appears to be born because of the birth of the material body, but actually the living entity is eternal. He's not born. And in spite of his being situated in a material body, he's transcendental and eternal. Thus he cannot be destroyed. By nature he's full of bliss. He doesn't engage himself in any material activities. Therefore, the activities performed due to his contact with material bodies do not entangle him. Well, okay. So what does that mean? Are we not entangled in our bodies? We're entangled. But we're not entangled. We're entangled, we're not entangled. This, interesting idea. We're entangled because of our desires, our material attractions, because of our desire to enjoy material sense gratification. But, as explained in the second chapter, the soul cannot be burnt by fire or withered by wind. The soul cannot be harmed. One of the main points right in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's saying that, Arjuna is saying he doesn't want to kill. Krishna's saying, you won't be killing. It's just the bodies, the people. They'll be untouched, unharmed, even just untouched by this whole phenomenon of the body being killed. So one is attached, entangled in that way, but actually one is not entangled when one sees more on the absolute platform. An example which we were told Prabhupada gave, and it's not a bad example, it's a good example, that one is walking down the road and one sees on the side of the road there's a tree with some person embracing the tree hard, holding onto the tree. But the person is calling out to the tree, "Let me go! Let me go!" It's like that. All he has to do is let himself go, and that's it. So it's a very artificial position in material life. Okay, verse 33. The sky, due to its subtle nature, does not mix with anything, although it is all-pervading. Similarly, the soul situated in Brahman vision does not mix with the body, though situated in that body. And again, Prabhupada's talking about, or Krishna is talking about, the vision. The vision. One has to cultivate a type of vision based on understanding, and in due course it'll become realization. So, Srila Prabhupada, in the purport, another short purport, that ear, well, it's interesting. What the term used is akash, which Prabhupada translates as sky, which is the usual translation, or even ether. But in the purport, Prabhupada is referring to air, which is, something different. It's something different, but still the same thing applies, that the air enters into water, mud, stool, and whatever else is there, but it doesn't mix with anything. Similarly, the living entity, even though situated in varieties of bodies, is aloof from them due to his subtle nature. Therefore, it's impossible to see with the material eyes how the living entity is in contact with this body and how he is out of it after the destruction of the body. No one in science can ascertain this. Okay, so now last verse in this subsection 34. O son of Bharat, as the sun alone illuminates all this universe, so does the living entity, one with the body, illuminate the entire body by consciousness. So the point here is about consciousness. Consciousness, which is the nature of, or part of the entity of the soul. The soul is conscious. The soul has consciousness. And this consciousness illuminates the whole body. So one's hand, even though the soul is somewhere in the vicinity of the heart, in one's hand, consciousness is there, one feels. So Prabhupada makes the point, there are various theories regarding consciousness. In order to give the understanding of how consciousness is working, the verse itself, and Prabhupada elaborates in the purport, the example is given of the sun situated in one place, but is illuminating the whole cosmos, the whole universe. Similarly, the soul is situated in the region of the heart, and the consciousness of the soul is pervading the whole body. So as the sun is not affected, Prabhupada says, by the qualities of what it illuminates, similarly the soul is not affected by the qualities of the body which it inhabits, which it illuminates. And then Prabhupada, of course, he makes down towards the bottom of the purport. Well, anyway, Prabhupada makes the point, when the soul has passed from the body, there's no more consciousness. Therefore, consciousness is not a product of the combinations of matter. It's a symptom of the soul, of the living entity. So then Prabhupada makes a point again to distinguish between the jiva and the super soul, that the consciousness of the living entity, although qualitatively one with the supreme consciousness, is not supreme, qualitatively one, but it is not supreme because the consciousness which is in one particular body is not shared with another body. I am conscious of my body, not your body. But the super soul is conscious of all bodies and everything. And finally, verse 35, which is like a summary, really. Those who see with eyes of knowledge the difference between the body and the knower of the body, and can also understand the process of liberation from bondage in material nature, attain to the supreme goal. So the process of liberation, as described here, what we just read, is the development of this vision. So, in the purport, there's, right at the beginning of the purport, actually, Prabhupada says something which we quoted right on Monday when we began this chapter. The purport of this 13th chapter is that one should know the distinction between the body, the owner of the body, and the supersoul. One should recognize the process of liberation as described in verses 8 through 12. Then one can go on to the supreme destination. Yeah. So the process of liberation as described in verses 8 through 12, and also here, the vision of seeing oneself distinct from the body. Then one can go to the supreme destination. So then, in paragraphs 2 and 3, a summary of the chapters given. First of all, this is now the second paragraph, a faithful person should get good association, hear about Krishna. Then, we're still in the second paragraph, then that faithful person should take shelter of a spiritual master and learn the spiritual science. And then the summary goes on into the third paragraph. We should understand what is the gross body and then the subtle body, and then beyond that learn about the supersoul, and then understand what we've just been reading this evening, how the world is working by a conjunction of the soul and the material elements. And then Prabhupada concludes, one who can see the constitution of the whole material manifestation as this combination of the soul and material elements, and can also see the situation of the Supreme Soul, so that person becomes eligible for transfer to the spiritual world. These things are meant for contemplation and for realization, and one should have a complete understanding of this chapter with the help of the spiritual master. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports to the 13th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of nature, the enjoyer, and consciousness. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.